Tell me, as a supplement founder, does this sound familiar? You spent 6 months perfecting your supplement formula. You researched all the clinical studies and landed on one star ingredient. You created detailed content explaining why your chosen form of the ingredient is better than the cheap alternatives. Your Facebook ads are performing well. People are clicking. They're reading your sales page, but sales are on a downward spiral. Why is that? Could it be that they go to Amazon and type in your hero ingredient and buy the cheapest version they can find? You just educated your prospect right out of a sale. Welcome to Health Business Mastery, the Creative Thirst podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Hewitt. Now, don't get me wrong, education is selling supplements is important, but you have to be careful of what I call the ingredient spotlight dilemma. And if you're selling supplements online right now, there's a good chance you're doing this without even realizing it. You're building trust through education, creating hope through the unique mechanism, and then watching your prospects use that education to find the cheapest version of what you just taught them about. The frustrating part is that everything you did was technically correct. You built trust by explaining the root cause. You created hope by showing how your specific ingredient solves the problem. You followed my supplement framework, but you still lost the sale. And here's what makes this even more painful. The more sophisticated you are as a marketer, the more likely you are to make this mistake because you understand the importance of education. You know, prospects need to believe in the mechanism. You've read the frameworks about unique mechanisms of trust and hope. So you do exactly what you're supposed to do. You educate, you explain, you build credibility through detailed mechanism breakdowns, and you inadvertently turn your premium supplement into a commodity. Now, before we go any further, I need to be clear about something. This episode is not about dumbing down your marketing. It's not about hiding information from prospects or being vague about how your supplement works. And it's not about using a proprietary blend to hide your ingredients. This is about understanding the strategic difference between education that builds value and education that destroys it. Because here's what most supplement marketers don't realize. There's a threshold, a tipping point, where education stops building your unique mechanism and starts commoditizing your ingredients. And that threshold is different depending on your marketplace sophistication stage. You see, the ingredient spotlight dilemma happens when your marketing focuses too heavily on the hero ingredient instead of the hero mechanism. And let me break down what I mean by that. In supplement marketing, we have two different stories we need to tell. Remember, every unique mechanism has two parts. The first part is unique mechanism of trust, and the second is the unique mechanism of hope. The unique mechanism of trust explains why they've struggled. It breaks down the root cause of their problem. This is where you build credibility by demonstrating you understand what's really going on in their body. The unique mechanism of hope explains how your supplement addresses that root cause. This is where the ingredient comes in. It's the missing piece that makes the solution work. Most supplement brands get the first part right. They explain the problem well. They build trust. But then they make a critical mistake in the second part. They spotlight the ingredient instead of the mechanism. Here's the difference. When you spotlight the ingredient, your marketing sounds like this. You need this specific ingredient form because it's the most bioavailable version available. But when you spotlight the mechanism, your marketing sounds like this. You need a delivery system that gets the active compounds into your cells where they can regulate the specific biological pathways involved in your condition. That's why we use a specialized process combined with specific cofactors that most supplements in this category are missing. Now, that's a bit clunky. I would absolutely rewrite that 3 TMs before co-mine up with the final version if this was a sales page. But can you see the difference? In the first example, the prospect learns they need a specific form of an ingredient. Now they can comparison shop. In the second example, they learn they need a system. The ingredient is part of that system, but it's not the whole story. This ties directly back to Creative Thirst's 4 Forces framework. When you spotlight the ingredient, you're only building hope, but you're not building enough belief, because belief requires differentiation. If your prospect believes that any version of the ingredient will work, they'll buy the cheapest one. But if they believe they need your specific formulation because of how the components work together, now you've built both hope and belief. And this is where Amazon becomes the test of your marketing. Amazon has trained supplement buyers to evaluate products on 2 dimensions only: price and reviews. If your marketing has spotlighted the ingredient alone, you've just sent your educated prospect to Amazon, where they'll filter by that ingredient name, sort by price, and read reviews. Your detailed education about why your chosen form is superior to the cheap alternatives doesn't help you here. It helps Amazon sellers. You built the trust. You created the hope, but Amazon captured the sale. This is the dual mind problem playing out in real time. Here's the dual mind problem in selling supplements. Remember, people buy supplements with 2 minds. Bicatue, they sit right in the middle of a functional sale and an emotional sale. On the functional side, you convince them they need a specific ingredient form. But on the emotional side, you didn't give them a reason to believe your version is different enough to justify the purchase decision. The functional mind is now satisfied. They know what they need. The emotional mind hasn't been engaged enough to overcome the price objection. So they default to the functional decision, find the cheapest version of what they now know they need. And remember, I mentioned marketplace sophistication before. Here's where that comes into play. This dilemma looks different depending on what stage your market is in. If you're in a stage 2 market where prospects are just becoming aware of the ingredient, some level of ingredient education is necessary. They don't know what your hero ingredient is yet. You have to build that awareness. But most supplement categories are firmly in stage 3 or stage 4. The market has already heard about your ingredient. They've seen other brands talking about it. At this stage, leading with ingredient education is commoditizing yourself. In stage 3 and beyond, you need to shift from ingredient spotlight to mechanism spotlight. You need to show why your formulation delivers the ingredient differently, more effectively, or in a way that addresses something other formulations miss. And that is the education paradox. Let's dive deeper into how this commoditization actually happens, because on the surface, it seems counterintuitive. Education should build value, right? It should position you as the expert. It should create trust, and it does all of those things. But it also does something else. It gives your prospect the knowledge they need to shop on features instead of benefits. Here's how the psychology works. When you educate a prospect about a specific ingredient, you're moving them from problem aware to solution aware. That's good. That's necessary. But if that's where your education stops, you've left them in the danger zone. Because once they're solution aware, they now have a concrete thing to search for. They can type your hero ingredient into Amazon. They can compare products based on that specific feature. You've given them the vocabulary to commoditize your category. This is fundamentally different from how other products work. If I'm selling a water filter, I can educate you about the dangers of chlorine and lead in water. That education doesn't commoditize my product because the solution isn't a single ingredient you can go buy. It's a system. But in supplements, we often market ingredients as if they are the complete solution. And ingredients, by definition, are commodities. Anyone can source your hero ingredient. Anyone can put it in a capsule. If that's your whole story, you're competing on price, whether you realize it or not. Now, let's connect this back to the 4 forces framework. When you spotlight an ingredient, here's what happens to each force. With the force of desire, you're amplifying it by explaining the future state. This works well. They want the benefits you're describing. With the force of hope, you're building this by introducing the ingredient as the missing piece. This also works. They believe the ingredient can deliver the benefits. With the force of trust, you're building it through education and mechanism explanation. Again, this works. But here's where it breaks down. With the force of belief. Belief requires differentiation. If the prospect believes that any source of the ingredient will work, they don't have enough belief in your product specifically. Remember, belief acts as both a pushing and pulling force. It pushes them toward believing a solution exists, but it pulls them toward their current beliefs about how buying decisions work. And their current belief, trained by Amazon, is that all versions of the same ingredient are essentially the same. So your education built 3 out of 4 forces. But the 4th force, belief in your specific product, is weak. That's why they leave your sales page and go to Amazon. Let me give you some real examples of how this plays out across different supplement categories. Omega-3 fish oil is the classic case. Brands spent years educating consumers about EPA and DHA ratios, about triglyceride form versus ethyl ester, about molecular distillation and purity testing. All of that education was valuable. It built a market. But now, that educated market comparison shops based on those exact features. They sort by EPA and DHA per dollar. They look for the triglyceride form at the lowest price. The education created a commodity category. Collagen is heading down the same path. Brands are educating about types 1, 2, and 3 collagen, about hydrolyzed versus undenatured, about molecular weight and absorption. All good information, all potentially commoditizing. Probiotics followed a similar trajectory. Early education about CFU counts and strain diversity built the market. Now, prospects comparison shop by CFUs per dollar and number of strains. The education metrics became the commodity features. The brands that are winning in these categories aren't the ones with the best education content. They're the ones who shifted from ingredient spotlight to mechanism spotlight before the commoditization happened. For example, look at how Ritual markets their Essential for Women multivitamin. They don't lead with specific vitamin forms, that would be ingredient spotlighting. Instead, they lead with their traceable supply chain and their forms chosen for life stages. The specific ingredients are part of the story, but not the story. Or look at Athletic Greens. Regardless of how good or bad the product is, let's just look at the marketing. They could spotlight any number of their 75 ingredients. Instead, they spotlight the formulation philosophy, the idea that nutrients work synergistically, and most supplements miss these interactions. The specific ingredients are supporting evidence, not the main character. If you're marketing supplements, you have to be careful of the functional trap. Here's why supplement marketers fall into this trap more than other product marketers. Supplements sit between functional and emotional purchases. And when we're building trust, we naturally lean into the functional side. We want to prove our supplement works. We want to show the mechanism of action. So we create content that satisfies the functional mind. We explain exactly how the ingredient works at the cellular level. We break down the biochemistry. We cite studies. We compare different forms. And we think we're building a compelling case for our product. But what we're actually doing is building a compelling case for the ingredient. The functional mind is satisfied with understanding the ingredient, the emotional mind never gets fully engaged. This is what I mean when I say supplements require both minds to be satisfied simultaneously. You can't just win on the functional side. The functional side alone leads to comparison shopping. You need the emotional side to create the belief that your version matters. But most supplement marketers are more comfortable with functional arguments. They're more comfortable with science. So that's where they focus their education. And that's how they educate themselves out of sales. One more thing to understand about this dilemma. It gets worse as the market sophistication increases. In a stage 2 market, ingredient education works because the market hasn't heard it before. You're the first to explain why this specific ingredient matters. Your education creates differentiation just by being first. But as competitors enter and the market moves to stage 3, everyone starts using the same ingredient education. Now, your explanation sounds identical to your competitor's explanation. The ingredient education that once differentiated you now commoditizes you. This is why so many supplement brands see their cost of acquisition increase over time. They're running the same education-focused ads in an increasingly sophisticated market. The education still builds trust, but it no longer builds differentiation. So conversion rates drop, cost per acquisition rises, and they blame the algorithm or the ad creative, when the real issue is their message no longer creates enough belief in their specific product. The market moved from stage 2 to stage 3, but their marketing didn't evolve with it. They're still spotlighting ingredients in a market that now needs mechanism differentiation. So if ingredient spotlighting creates commoditization, how do you build unique mechanisms around ingredients that are already commoditized? How do you sell omega-3 or collagen or probiotics when everyone knows what those are? The answer is to shift from ingredient spotlight to system spotlight. You're not just selling a single ingredient. You're selling a system where that ingredient is one component. This is the difference between a scientific unique mechanism and a process unique mechanism. Remember, there are 2 types of unique mechanisms of hope. The scientific version focuses on how it works at the molecular level. The process version focuses on how it's formulated, manufactured, or delivered differently. When you have a commoditized ingredient, the scientific mechanism alone won't differentiate you. Everyone can point to the same studies. Everyone can explain why their form is better. So you need to layer in the process mechanism. You need to show what you're doing that others aren't. One of the most effective strategies is what I call the cofactor approach. Instead of spotlighting the hero ingredient, you spotlight what you've combined it with that others are missing. Let me give you an example. Instead of your mechanism being, we use the most bioavailable form, your mechanism becomes, this ingredient can't work effectively in the body without adequate cofactors that most people are deficient in. So we've combined it with the precise supporting nutrients in the exact ratios shown to maximize the biological pathway you're trying to influence. Now you're not just selling an ingredient, you're selling a formulation based on nutrient synergy. The prospect can't just go to Amazon and search for this. They'd need to buy multiple products and figure out the dosing. Your product does this for them. This approach works because it satisfies both minds. The functional mind gets the science. The ingredient needs cofactors to work optimally. The emotional mind gets the hope. In the prospect's mind, they think, hey, this company figured out what everyone else is missing. And critically, you've created belief in your product specifically. Because even though they could theoretically replicate your formulation, you've positioned yourself as the one who understood this relationship first. You're the expert who saw the gap in the market. Another powerful approach is delivery mechanism differentiation. This is especially effective when the ingredient itself is well known, but the delivery creates a meaningful difference in effectiveness. Look at how NMN supplements have evolved. Early brands spotlighted NMN as the anti-aging ingredient. That worked initially, but as the market matured, everyone was selling NMN. The category was commoditizing fast. The brands that maintained premium pricing shifted to delivery mechanisms. Sublingual powder for better absorption, liposomal encapsulation to survive stomach acid, time-release formulations for sustained blood levels. Each of these shifts the conversation from, do I need NMN, to, do I need NMN delivered this specific way? The ingredient is now part of a larger mechanism story. This works especially well because it gives you language for your unique mechanism. You're not just selling NMN, you're selling the only sublingual NMN formulation with absorption enhancers clinically shown to increase bioavailability by 40%. That's specific, that's defensible. That can't be easily commoditized by typing NMN into Amazon. A third approach is building a formulation philosophy that elevates above any single ingredient. This is what I call the framework play. Instead of your unique mechanism being about one ingredient, it's about a philosophy of how nutrients should work together. The ingredients become proof points of the philosophy rather than the story themselves. Athletic Greens does this masterfully. They could spotlight any of their 75 ingredients. Instead, they spotlight comprehensive nutrition in one scoop, backed by a philosophy that nutrients work synergistically. Ritual does this by organizing around life stages and traceability. The specific ingredients matter, but they're chosen to fit a larger philosophy about what vitamins should do. Seed does this with their 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic positioning. The strains matter, but the unique mechanism is about how they've addressed the prebiotic gap that most probiotic supplements miss. When you have a formulation philosophy, you can educate about ingredients without commoditizing yourself, because the education supports a larger framework that competitors can't easily copy. The prospect learns about your hero ingredient, but in the context of your unique approach to supplementation. They can't replicate that by just going to Amazon and buying the ingredient. They need to understand and recreate your entire philosophy. Sometimes the differentiation isn't in what the ingredient is, but where it comes from or how it's made. This is a process-unique mechanism. Remember the Schlitz beer example from copywriting legend Claude Hopkins? I mentioned it in an earlier episode, but here's a recap. Every beer company was using the same process to ensure purity, but Schlitz was the first to talk about it. That process became their unique mechanism, even though it wasn't actually unique to them. The same principle applies to supplement ingredients. Everyone might be using the same ingredient, but where does it come from? How is it manufactured? What quality controls are in place? If you're using an ingredient sourced from a specific region known for purity, that's a story. If you're using a manufacturing process that ensures molecular stability, that's a story. If you have third-party testing that goes beyond industry standard, that's a story. These process elements create differentiation even when the ingredient itself is commoditized. You're not claiming your ingredient is chemically different. You're showing that how you source, test, and deliver it creates a meaningful difference in quality. This approach works especially well for building trust because it shows attention to detail. It demonstrates that you understand the limitations of standard industry practices, and it gives prospects a reason to pay more. Not because the ingredient is different, but because the care put into sourcing and quality control is different. In practice, the most effective unique mechanisms layer multiple approaches. You're not just using cofactors. You're using cofactors in specific ratios based on a formulation philosophy, delivered through a proprietary method with premium sourcing. Each layer makes commoditization harder. Each layer gives you more story to tell. Each layer creates more belief that your product is genuinely different. This is why Creative Thirst's framework emphasizes that the unique mechanism is an idea you can create. It's not just about finding one thing that's different. It's about building a story around multiple elements that, when combined, create a mechanism that can't be easily replicated. When you do this right, you can educate extensively about how your supplement works without commoditizing the ingredient. Because you're not spotlighting the ingredient, you're spotlighting the system. And systems are much harder to commoditize than ingredients. So now let's talk about how to actually implement this. How do you educate prospects without spotlighting ingredients in a way that commoditizes your product? The key is what I call the education hierarchy. You want to educate from most unique to least unique. Start with what only you have or what you understand uniquely. End with what everyone could say. Here's how this plays out in practice. In your VSL or sales page, the structure should go: first, establish the unique mechanism of trust. Explain the root cause of their problem in a way they haven't heard before. This builds credibility without being commoditizable because it's about the problem, not about ingredients yet. Second, introduce your formulation philosophy or process. This is your unique lens on how the solution should work. This is where you start building the unique mechanism of hope, but you're doing it at the system level, not the ingredient level. Third, explain how specific ingredients fit into your system. Now, you can talk about your hero ingredient, but it's in the context of your larger mechanism. It's one piece of a puzzle you've already established. Fourth, provide the detailed science and studies. This satisfies the functional mind's need for proof, but it comes after you've already built differentiation through your unique approach. The mistake most brands make is starting at step 4. They lead with the ingredient and the studies. That satisfies the functional mind, but never builds enough differentiation for the emotional mind to justify the premium. When you follow the education hierarchy, you can provide just as much education, maybe more, but you're structuring it so the differentiation comes first. By the time you're talking about the specific ingredient, the prospect already believes your approach is different. The ingredient becomes proof of your approach rather than the approach itself. Here's a simple way to test if you're spotlighting ingredients or mechanisms. After someone reads your sales page or watches your video sales letter, what would they search for on Amazon? If they'd search for your specific ingredient name, you're spotlighting ingredients, your education has commoditized your product. If they'd struggle to find an equivalent because your mechanism involves multiple components or a specific process, you're spotlighting mechanisms. Your education has built differentiation. I call this the Amazon stress test. Run your marketing through it. Be honest about what your educated prospect would search for. If the answer is a single ingredient name, you need to restructure your education hierarchy. The art of this is balancing trust-building education with differentiation. You need enough education to satisfy the functional mind, but you need to structure that education so it builds belief in your specific approach. And this is why I emphasize that supplements require satisfying both the functional and emotional minds simultaneously. The functional mind wants to understand how it works. The emotional mind wants to believe your version is worth the premium. Ingredient spotlighting satisfies the functional mind, but fails the emotional mind. Mechanism spotlighting can satisfy both. The way you do this in practice is by using the ingredient science to support your unique mechanism claims, rather than as standalone proof points. Don't just say, our form is more bioavailable than the cheap alternatives. Everyone says that. Say, Our optimization protocol requires this specific molecular form because only this form can reach the target tissue efficiently enough to activate the biological pathway at the dosage needed to produce results within the timeline our users expect. Same ingredient, same science, but now it's supporting a larger mechanism story that creates differentiation. As the market grows, your marketing moves up the sophistication curve. To finally understand that this shift from ingredient spotlight to mechanism spotlight is about matching your marketing to your marketplace sophistication stage. If you're in stage 2, some ingredient education is still differentiating. But watch the competitive landscape. When you start seeing competitors using similar ingredient education, it's time to evolve to stage 3 messaging. In stage 3, you need clear mechanism differentiation. This is where most supplement categories are now. The market knows the basic ingredients. They need to understand why your formulation approach is different. In stage 4, even your mechanism gets elaborated by competitors. This is when you need to shift toward prospect identification and emotional connection. The mechanism is still important, but it's table stakes. The real differentiation comes from understanding your prospect better than anyone else. Most supplement brands are fighting stage 3 battles with stage 2 marketing. They're educating about ingredients in a market that already knows about ingredients. That's why they're losing to Amazon. The market has moved on, but their marketing hasn't. Here's what I want you to take away from this episode. The ingredient spotlight dilemma isn't about whether to educate prospects. Education is essential in supplement marketing. The dilemma is about what level to educate at. Educate about ingredients and you commoditize yourself. Educate about mechanisms and you differentiate yourself. This is supplement-specific thinking. In other e-commerce categories, feature education often works fine, but supplements are unique because ingredients are inherently commoditizable. Anyone can source the same ingredients. If that's your whole story, you're competing on price. The brands that win in supplement marketing understand this. They build education that creates trust and hope while simultaneously building belief in their specific approach. They don't spotlight ingredients. They spotlight the mechanisms that make their formulation meaningfully different. And here's the reality check. If you can't articulate what makes your formulation meaningfully different beyond the ingredients you use, you might actually be selling a commodity. That's a strategy problem, not a marketing problem. But if you do have genuine differentiation in your formulation approach, in your sourcing, in your delivery method, in your cofactor combinations, then your marketing job is to spotlight that mechanism rather than just the ingredients within it. This prevents the cycle where you educate prospects, build trust, create hope, and then watch them go to Amazon to find the cheapest version of the ingredient you just taught them about. So here's my challenge for you. Look at your current marketing. Run it through the Amazon stress test. After someone reads your sales page, what would they search for? If the answer is a single ingredient name, you're spotlighting ingredients when you should be spotlighting mechanisms, then look at your unique mechanism. Can you articulate what makes your formulation approach different beyond just the ingredients? If not, you need to develop that story before you can market effectively at stage 3 sophistication. This is exactly the kind of strategic issue we work through in the group coaching program, because fixing this isn't about tweaking your ad copy. It's about restructuring how you think about your product positioning and your educational content strategy. If you're dealing with the ingredient spotlight dilemma and want help developing mechanism-focused marketing that builds differentiation instead of commoditization, the link to apply for the group coaching program is in the show notes. Remember, selling supplements is different. Generic e-commerce tactics will fail you precisely because they don't account for how supplement buying psychology works. You need supplement-specific strategies for supplement-specific problems. If you need help with that, go to creativethirst.com and reach out to me.